If you were an NBA head coach and you were asked one simple question, how do you stop Steph Curry? Now, Curry and the Warriors have faced a plethora of different teams throughout his near 2-decade career. And of course, there's been plenty of defensive schemes thrown his way. From trapping him so far beyond the arc to making sure there are constant eyes on him as he moves off the ball, off of screens, which may or may not be moving screens.
Have a final MVP come back to your team. Steph Curry again.
In reality, however, there's only one single answer to that question that coaches have tried to implement. Grab him. Grab him and push him around when he doesn't have the ball. Players need to employ some sort of physicality to throw him off rhythm, and to make him feel the contact, to feel the hands of a defender so he's not comfortable just running around screens all day long. In reality, if this kind of strategy was used against any other player, it'd be called a foul like 95% of the time. I mean, this isn't a legal way to play defense. And yet, why does it seem like teams get away with it? From the Denver Nuggets to the Cleveland Cavaliers of the LeBron James era to the Houston Rockets of today, with many teams in between who all share the same opinion, this is the way to stop Steph Curry. Over the years, this is something that's been highlighted more and more often in the mainstream media. Oh, everyone knows now, from the media to the announcers to even fans of other teams. They notice the way that Curry gets defended. In this video, let's take a detailed dive into how all this got started, why the referees turn a blind eye, and how effective is this tactic actually.
And welcome back everyone to the NBA playoffs. Denver hosting Golden State here from the Pepsi Center.
The 2013 playoffs are considered to be Steph Curry's breakout party, as he rose from a brash young point guard into one of the NBA's biggest stars. In fact, it was his first ever playoff appearance, and the world was not prepared for what they were about to witness. In this playoff run in particular, you might not remember, but there was quite some controversy in regards to the level of physicality against Steph Curry. In the first round against the Denver Nuggets, the Warriors came in as the underdogs, but as they captured Game 1, then went up 3-1, and then secured the victory, there was only one thing excruciatingly obvious. The Nuggets had no answers for Steph. So much so that they needed to try something else, something different. According to Andre Iguodala, who was on the Nuggets at the time, he claimed that their coach, George Karl, wanted to ramp up the physicality on Steph, and even wanted to rough him up and take cheap shots at him when he doesn't have the ball. The reason being, the refs don't really pay attention that much to players off the ball, definitely not as much as the player who actually has the ball. For Steph, who excels at moving off the ball and shooting off a catch, George Karl thought, "F the freedom of movement rules. Let's bring back hand checking." If they could somehow limit his movements, if they intentionally grab him, block his path, heck, maybe even trip him, maybe that could slow him down. Eventually, this led to a spat between the head coaches, with Iguodala widely suspected to have told rival coach Mark Jackson what Karl's plan was. And Jackson was furious. Quote, "They tried to send hitmen at Steph. There were some dirty plays early." And Curry added on, "There were a couple of plays I was cutting down the lane and I'm not really involved in the play, and somehow I get an elbow to my chest." For the Nuggets, it actually kinda worked in slowing him down. For instance, in his first 4 games, Curry averaged 27.2 points a game and hit 47% of his three-pointers. In the final 2 games of the series, he only managed 18 points a game and struggled with his three-point shot. While George Karl's game plan ultimately failed, along with his coaching career, this tactic became the blueprint for the rest of Curry's NBA career. Other teams would never admit it, but George Karl's idea set a new precedent for defense and for the referees. When every team adopts a certain strategy that becomes the norm, instead of viewing plays like this as fouls, the refs now view this as the standard way to defend Steph Curry. If I could name one example that's very similar, I'd say it has to be Shaq. They're 2 completely different players who've dominated the game in 2 completely different areas of the court. When Shaq got deep position in the paint, literally nobody, and I mean nobody, could stop him. Defenders were bouncing off of him.
Shaquille O'Neal, watch Mutombo. It's almost like he lifts him off the floor. Your feet leave the floor, it's pretty difficult to jump.
So they were allowed to get away with hacking him and playing him much more rough compared to any other center in history. You know, Shaq did get a lot of flack back then for his flying elbows, but honestly, I think it's an adequate response to how much he got fouled. Shaq was, simply put, unstoppable from that area of the court. Teams were literally grabbing 7-footers off the streets, putting them in an NBA jersey and sending them into the game just to foul Shaq. Opposing centers fouled him so much that they got used to it. The refs got used to it. And if they were to call every foul, Shaq would shoot like triple the free throws he did. Steph is similar in that regard, but instead of dominating in the paint, he dominates with range. With the slightest bit of space, the slimmest of openings, Steph can get off a clean look. So when he's moving around screens, getting chased by his defender, getting grabbed and hit is the only way for the defender to have some sort of advantage in slowing him down. I've heard one conspiracy that the refs let defenders get away with this because it's a way to balance out the Warriors' moving screens. Back in the day, especially with Andrew Bogut, he was notorious for setting moving screens that would never get called. That was a huge complaint from everyone back then, so when they were constantly grabbing Steph off the ball, no one was against it because it balanced out all those moving screens to get him open in the first place. Combine this with, the fans don't really pay attention to players when they don't have the ball, it's easy to convince the audience that there aren't any fouls when they don't see it. Anyway, back to the 2013 playoffs. When the Warriors knocked out the Nuggets, it was on to the second round against the seasoned, more experienced San Antonio Spurs. In Game 1 of that series, Curry registered one of his greatest playoff games ever. 44 points and 11 assists, and while the Warriors still lost the game, the Spurs looked like they had no answer for him. That was until Popovich realized, there's very few ways to defend him like this, and they need to find some way to slow him down, thus employing George Karl's strategy but in a much more low-key manner. More importantly, they put the taller, lengthier, stronger Kawhi Leonard on Steph, so when he was trying to get open, it was near impossible to escape the grasp of his gigantic mitts. The Spurs succeeded in their strategy to slow him down, as Steph struggled in every game after Game 1. But one thing to remember is back then, the Warriors were coached by Mark Jackson, and Curry wasn't moving off the ball that much. Sure, he'd do it sometimes, but when Steve Kerr took over in 2014, he implemented a brand new kind of offense. One where Curry didn't have the pressure of creating every shot for himself, and instead moving off the ball way more than ever before. Along with the increased ball movement came a much more serious dilemma for opponents. They wondered, what in the world can we do to stop this guy from getting open? Well, grabbing became the league-wide solution.
You have to grab you, right? And they're going to let you play in the finals. So when those two players, when Steph and Klay come together, you have to physically grab them. You can't give them space to move and cut because you have too many guys that are great passers, great shooters, and can take you off the dribble.
Grabbing became the integral strategy in helping the Cavs come back from 3-1 down to win the 2016 championship. Channing Frye admitted they started to aggressively grab Steph and Klay more and more and forced the refs to call a foul, which they rarely did. But then when Kevin Durant joined the team a year later, there was nothing else anyone could do. Fast forward to Ime Udoka and the Houston Rockets. The 2024-25 Rockets were the 4th-ranked offense in the league, and that was the anchor which helped them sustain a high seed in the West for an entire season. When people start complaining about foul calls or crying about physicality, you've done your job. That's the first step in winning the battle. So I told my team, when this team starts crying about it, up the intensity, up the aggressiveness, and make the refs adjust to you. Now, there's a lot to unpack from this single quote from Udoka. But let's start with the concept of making the refs adjust to you.
The Rockets' game plan is clear. If Steph Curry is in your vicinity, give him an unfriendly hug. Rough him up a little bit.
Similar to George Karl all those years ago, the concept of making the refs adjust to you is to get them to feel like it's normal to play defense like this, so they won't call anything. Over the years, they've been conditioned to understand that this is how teams defend Steph Curry, so it's become so normalized that they don't recognize it as a foul anymore. We've always heard the claim, in the playoffs, it gets more physical and tougher. But there's a line between physicality and blatant fouling. The Rockets' defense kinda tiptoes that line, and they are right on the edge of going over that normalization. Perhaps they've already gone over the line depending on who you ask. At the same time, it's been a huge reason why teams like the Cavs and a few others in the past were able to stop him. Here's the important question though, how effective is this tactic? How much does grabbing him and roughing him up impact his actual shooting and his actual game? Well, we saw in that Denver series back in 2013 when George Karl started doing it, Curry played much worse in his final 2 games than his first 4. We saw it in several finals appearances against the Cavaliers too. As great as Steph Curry is, his numbers in those finals were strangely weak compared to his usual playoff numbers or regular season numbers. Here's what they look like. And honestly, it has way more to do than just grabbing and holding him. Even though the Cavs lost in 3 of those 4 finals, they found great success defending him. They relentlessly forced him to give up the ball and gave him such little space on every part of the floor. They needed at least 2 different players to have eyes on him at all times, one to actually defend him and the other to call out where he is moving to. All of this just to make sure Steph Curry doesn't get off a clean look. And the Cavs, just like the Rockets, they were just barely skirting the line in their physicality, and they knew what their limits were in the extent of forcing the refs to make a call. Of course, I don't want to take anything away from the Cavs. Their defense on Curry was much more than that, and it was just phenomenal across the board. They did everything they can to slow him down from all angles. Heck, that's why Kevin Durant became a 2-time Finals MVP. They were so focused on Curry that they didn't have enough resources to stop Durant. So the answer to that question? Well, it works sometimes. It does and it did impact his game. But as the saying goes, great players will find a way to overcome it. I think the debate of whether or not this kind of physicality should be allowed in the league, I feel like it's obvious from my perspective. I think if defenders clearly have their hands on him and grab him from moving, it should be a foul. But I do think body-to-body contact is fine, as long as you're not using your hands to impede his movement. I mean, that's kinda why we have the whole hand-checking rule anyway, right? If you stay in front of him, if you wisely move around the screens, you can still keep up without grabbing. But then again, there's a reason why it's so hard. Very few players in the league could do it. Of course, things like this don't just happen to Steph Curry. Over the years, we've seen plenty of superstars receive the same kind of treatment. Like, why is it that Curry never gets many calls, but Jimmy Butler, his own teammate, gets the greatest whistle in the history of the sport? Even with the slightest contact, he's at the foul line. Anyway, that's all folks. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Do you think the NBA should allow plays like this to continue to happen? Is it okay to have a different set of standards and rules depending on the player? Just like how Shaq used to get reffed back in the day, do you think Steph deserves the same? Or do you think it should be, more consistent across the board, which seems like the most rational answer? Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.